A quick welcome to everybody for today's workshop. So we're from the Center for the Economics of Human Development, and we're organizing the workshop this quarter. Thanks to Linda Waite and her team at NORC and Center on Aging for inviting us. We hope that you'll join us in later weeks. Our center's research takes an interdisciplinary perspective on understanding human potential. So that's the theme with the focus on the early years, which motivates this quarter. And today we have Dr. Orla Doyle, who's an economist at University College Dublin in Ireland, and her research focuses on the economics of human development and extends beyond what you're going to hear today. Although what you're going to hear is about preparing for life, and over the last 10 years, she's designed and led a research study to study the effectiveness and the mechanisms at play for Ireland's first early childhood home visiting program. And she's a good friend of our center, and I'm happy to introduce Orla.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Here we go. Share. Oh, hang on. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation to present again at the Centre. I always like presenting to this group. And as Alison said, yeah, the title of this paper is Can Early Intervention Have a Sustained Effect on Human Capital? And it's based on a randomized controlled trial that I've been running here in Dublin for the last 13 years of an early intervention program called Preparing for Life. And I know last week you heard about a home visiting program in Germany. So today you're going to hear about a home visiting program in Ireland. And I'm also aware that some of you are very aware of Preparing for Life and have been hearing me present about it, because I've been coming to Chicago for over 10 years now. So lots of you know about Preparing for Life. But I'm also aware that there will be people on this call who don't know anything about PFL. So I am presenting this as if I'm assuming you know nothing for the people who don't know anything. So for those who do know about Preparing for Life, there may be parts of it that you just want to, eat your lunch or have a nap or whatever. So that's fine. Okay, so firstly, just a little bit of background. Again, probably preaching to converted, this group, but we know that there's an increasing focusing on the early childhood period. And this is because the earliest years obviously are the most productive in terms of children's brain development. And we know that most of children's brain development is genetic, but that the environment, and in particular parental stimulation and sensitive caregiving, can actually shape both structural and functional brain networks. And as economists, we care about these neurological processes because it impacts on children's human capital. And we know that inequalities in children's human capital typically arise in contexts of disadvantage, where a family's ability to invest in their children can be hampered for various reasons, like due to monetary constraints or due to the cognitive constraints that comes from living in long-term poverty. And while Fogel and Washbrook estimate that about half of all the income-related gaps in children's skills can be attributed to differences in both parenting styles and the quality of the home learning environment. So we have this kind of growing evidence based, obviously, that parental investment is important. Yet despite this, there's actually relatively few more contemporary trials that look at the sustained impact of parenting interventions on children's skills later in childhood. So with this in mind, in this study, we are examining the impact of an Irish early intervention program that lasts for 5 years, from pregnancy until the children start school at age 5. And we're looking at the impact of the program 5 years after the intervention had ended, so within middle childhood. And the name of the program, as we mentioned, is Preparing for Life. And along with ProKind that you heard about last weekend, it is the longest running experimental early intervention program in Europe. It is based on the premise that providing kind of intensive parenting support to disadvantaged families. So this is a targeted program. It is not a universal program. It is targeting those families who are most at risk. So basically, if we invest in these families, it will, from pregnancy to age 5, so the first 5 critical years of a child's development, it will then permanently alter children's skill level. And that will then have a knock-on effect in terms of reducing the intergenerational transmission of poverty. So myself and my co-authors, we've published lots and lots of papers on Preparing for Life. And I guess in our most recent paper, we find that the program had a large and substantive impact on children's skills at the end of the program, which is when the children were 5 years old and they were in their first year of what we call in Ireland primary school. So the real aim of this paper and the study then is really to test for the continuity or fade out of treatment effects now that the children are age 9 on average and they haven't received any treatment for about 5 years. And we're doing this because the evidence base that is used to justify investment in the earliest years is really based on a handful of very seminal studies that were conducted in the 1960s and 1970s that then followed participants into adulthood. And some of these studies at least did experience a reduction in treatment in the size of the treatment effect, or indeed a fading out of treatment effects in the immediate aftermath of the intervention, yet they still observed long-term outcomes for these children across a variety of different domains, as many people on this call have been investigating. But as I said, there have been some programs that have found sustained effects after the intervention has ended. For example, the Jamaica study, it's a home visiting study, found a 6-point gap in children's cognitive skills at their age 11 follow-up. So that was about 8 years after the intervention had ended. Similarly, the Abecedarian study found a pooled effect size for cognitive development of 0.37 of a standard deviation in their follow-up between age 8 and age 21. And then the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which is probably the closest program in style to Preparing for Life, they also found treatment effects at age 12 in terms of 0.1 to 0.2 a standard deviation on math and reading scores, but only for boys. The results were restricted to boys only. So despite these studies, though, Amond et al. Argue that we have a relative lack of knowledge about the mechanisms through which policies implemented in early childhood then transition to middle childhood and then on into adulthood. So one of the kind of aims of this study was to kind of fill this missing middle gap, or at least contribute towards it. And the second contribution then was really to address the fact that there are relatively few more contemporary
Orla, let me ask a question. You talk about the missing middle.
Yes.
Quite a few of these studies follow children until they're really into late old age, or at least into late middle age. And they follow them through high school and into college and early adult years. So I'm a little curious about what the missing middle is here. But
because I mean,
there's a lot of
there's a handful of studies, though. It's not, it is very much based on a handful of studies that were all conducted in the US. We don't have any.
Jamaica's through age 31 now.
That's true. That is true. You're right. Jamaica is that we have Jamaica.
And there's substantial effects on things like cognition and a lot of social and emotional skills, as well as earnings, education, and so forth. So that's why I'm a little surprised at this characterization. I mean, you're really quoting very old studies from ABC and Perry and so forth, but a lot of these have studied, and even with better measures of social and emotional cognitive skills, even the so-called Perry fade out of IQ vanishes when you look at this at age 55. We have good measures, at least of executive function, which is closely correlated with IQ. So that's why I'm a little bit worried about. I mean, it's great what you're doing. I just would try to say, look, this adds to the base, and I think it's significant and should be. But anyway, it's a minor issue.
No, I completely, I take your point. I suppose I would say that we have no evidence in Europe. In this part of the world, like we don't. There's no, like we don't have any of these long-term trials like you have in the US and in Jamaica.
But what about the there's a recent paper that Olds put out claiming to find evidence, and he was following these, and this is on NFP, through middle age, like into 19 years of age. They even were presenting some kind of cost benefit study.
Yeah.
And
but
so,
again,
I mean, yeah.
That was in the US too, right?
No, British.
Oh, but the nurse.
Olds went to Britain and created. Maybe I'm confused. There are a bunch of studies that have been done by Olds in Britain, I thought.
Yeah, there's what I know the study in Britain. It's called Family Nurse Partnership. However, as far as I'm aware, anyway, they only have data, as in it started after Preparing for Life. So they are a younger trial than us. They don't have data up, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, maybe I mischaracterized it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I know the UK study, and they've published one paper in the British Medical Journal looking at effects at age 2. And I haven't seen any follow-up studies beyond that, but I could be wrong. Maybe there are, but I haven't. I'm not that I'm
Okay,
aware.
no, I thought I saw this paper in pediatrics was, at 18, I thought, but you may be right. I thought it was British, but
I'll check it out. I'll check it out.
no, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. You're probably,
Okay.
I'm sure you're right. So sorry.
No, I'll have a look. But okay, so I absolutely take your point about the missing middle. Maybe can I say the missing European middle? In that case, I will reframe. Okay, so okay, going back then, I think the other thing we wanted to do was address the fact that of these more contemporary trials, there's relatively few with follow-up. And I suppose the seminal trials, like the older trials you were talking about, were highly informative about the effect of intervening, the long-term effect of intervening during a period that was largely devoid of providing any serious state supports to disadvantaged families. While the children who are participating in more contemporary trials, the services as usual are typically more generous in terms of providing subsidized healthcare, subsidized childcare, and a range of social kind of income supports for low-income families. So what this means potentially is, on the one hand, we may have lower effect sizes in more contemporary trials because these disadvantaged families are already receiving quite a high level of treatment as part of standard practice. However, on the other hand, we may expect to see potentially higher effect size in more contemporary trials if dynamic complementarities are at play, and that the treatment children whose initial skills have been boosted by the intervention, it allows them to more fully exploit this higher level of universal investment that's been made in most European countries, at least in the preschool period and the school period as well. And obviously this is based on Kuhn and Heckman's model of skill formation. So if such dynamic complementarities are at play, then we may expect that providing early and sustained investment in children and in parenting during this critical period of skill formation between the age of pregnancy and age 5, it's potential that it will generate effects beyond the life of the intervention. And this is something that we wanted to have a look, or we want to test. And then finally, contribution is to try to understand the mechanisms underlying these treatment effects. And as you know, most early intervention programs, particularly parenting programs and home visiting programs, they're based on the premise that promoting caregiving behavior that provides enriching and stimulating environments will have a positive effect on children's outcomes. So if you like, the mechanism linking treatment to child outcomes is changes in parenting behavior. And during the life of the trial, we collected lots of data on parenting and the home environment. So then we use confirmatory factor analysis to derive 5 theoretically relevant latent factors, capturing parenting styles, parenting beliefs, parent-child relationship, parental stimulation, and parental health investments. And then we use these 5 latent factors to conduct a mediation analysis to determine what proportion of any of these age 9 treatment effects can be explained by these changes in early parenting behavior. So this is a new method than the method I presented last year, and it is based on some of the suggestions that were that you guys gave to me last year.
But
So,
do you have data on the evolution of these parenting styles? In other words, not just at a point in time, but you're going to show us that.
Well, I'll show you what I did. So we have measures of parenting at 6, 12, 18, 24, 36, and 48 months.
I see. Okay. So you can form these factors at those times.
I'm not forming, I could do, but I'm not. I'm not forming the factors based on times at the moment. That is a good idea, though. I could try that. I'm not doing it at time. I'm doing it based on
interesting to see how it develops. I'd be very fascinated.
So that's something we can do, because we have the measures, as I said, at multiple time points, and we have common measures at multiple time points in the first 5 years.
And do you have videos by any chance of
no
visits or anything like that? No.
Unfortunately, we have no visits. I know that China Reach has videos. We don't. No videos, unfortunately. Okay,
And
so sorry,
just
go
a quick
ahead.
question. On the complementarity side, you mentioned about having more resources for disadvantaged families in Ireland in the recent period. You could also be that part of the program, in fact, is via providing families knowledge about access to these services, right? So if there are more services, then you should expect a higher effect, not because of dynamic complementarity, it's just because complementarity between home visits and higher services in the population.
Yes. What I will show you in a moment, though, is that information was made available as part of the treatment to both the treatment and the control group. So one of the treatments that we provide to both treatment and control was to help them access existing supports that they were entitled to. So what we'll be picking up specifically here is the treatment that obviously the control group didn't receive, but I'll show you that model in a moment. Okay, so, but yeah, no, I take your point. Just to preview the results, we find significant treatment effects on children's cognitive skills, on children's executive functioning and their achievement scores in reading and maths when they're 9 years old. And the size of the treatment effects are quite sizable. They are slightly smaller than the treatment effects we observed at age 5, but they're still quite large. However, we find no effects on children's socio-emotional skills at age 9, and we find no effects on other school outcomes, such as absenteeism rates from school at age 9. And we find that improvements in early parental investment, like parental beliefs, parental stimulation, and health inputs in particular, those different domains, explain between 20 and 45% of the treatment effects. And I'll show you those results later. We find, so we always get asked this, but we find no evidence of differential treatment effects according to gender, birth order, or distribution of ability. So all the effects that we observe are common, it's like an average treatment effect across the entire sample. We find similar effect sizes for both girls and boys. So just for those who don't know about Preparing for Life, it was developed in a bottom-up fashion in one of the most disadvantaged communities that we have here in Dublin. So 28 different community groups, service providers, local representatives got together to develop a program that met the needs of the residents in the community in which they were working and living in. And this was part of the Government and Atlantic Philanthropy's Prevention Early Intervention Program. So they funded up to 50 different early intervention programs in the north and south of Ireland, all at the same time in different communities, and Preparing for Life was one of those chosen. As I said, the program is operating in one of the most disadvantaged communities in Dublin. It is characterised by high levels of crime, high levels of unemployment, welfare dependency, drug use, and so on. And before the program began, we conducted a survey where we measured the children's school readiness skills in the first year of primary school. And we found that the children from this community were scoring below the norm in terms of their cognitive and non-cognitive skills. So there was evidence of need. And that despite substantial investment in the schools in this community, that the outcomes of these children were not improving over time. And it was recognized that essentially by the time these children started school, it was too late. They were already fallen so far behind where they should be at that they couldn't catch up. So that's why the program development team based in the community decided that if we want to intervene, we need to intervene as early as possible. And that is during pregnancy. So then the aim of the program was really to improve children's school readiness skills by giving parents the skills to help their children prepare for school. So we recruited 233 participants during pregnancy, or pregnant women during pregnancy. So this is a small sample trial. The sample size was restricted because the community in which we are working in is very small, and there's only 120 babies being born every year. So we're restricted in the number of babies that we could have recruited, or families that we could have recruited. We randomly assigned them into a high treatment group or a low treatment group. So as I said, this isn't a classic randomized control trial. Everyone who took part in the program received some support that they wouldn't otherwise have received. So both groups received €100 worth of child development toys and book packs. They both received facilitated access to a high quality preschool in the year before they started school. They both were invited to attend public health workshops on stress control and healthy eating that were taking place in the community. And here, just to address Victor's point, they both had what we call an information support worker, and that information support worker could help them access services that were unrelated to child development though. So if it was around housing services or unemployment services, they had an information worker who could help them access that and navigate those services. And finally, they were just invited to other random social events that Preparing for Life organized, like Christmas parties, sports days, things like that. But what Preparing for Life is really about are these 3 additional intensive parenting supports that were only provided to the parents in the high treatment group. And they include a 5-year home visiting program, baby massage classes in the first year, and the Triple P group-based parenting program in the second year. So I'll describe each of these in a little bit more detail now. So the main, at its heart, Preparing for Life is a home visiting program, similar in style to Nurse Family Partnership, similar in style to Jamaica, similar in style to Pro-Kins that you heard about last week. There are some differences though. So what's one of the biggest differences is that Preparing for Life starts during pregnancy and goes on to age 5. NFP, Pro-Kins, Jamaica start either before or after the birth and typically last for 2 years. So they're kind of a shorter duration and they start slightly later. But in Preparing for Life, we start during pregnancy, and every family in the high treatment group has a mentor. The mentor then visits the family's homes once every 2 weeks, starting during pregnancy, continuing until the children start school, which is around when they're 4 or 5 years old in Ireland. And the aim of these home visits are really to support and educate the parents around parenting and appropriate parenting practices, encouraging greater parental stimulation, for example. The mentors then are all have at least a college degree, and they received extensive training prior to implementing the program, and then they receive monthly supervision throughout the trial to ensure fidelity to the program model. The mentors use a variety of different techniques to deliver the intervention, again, similar to other home visiting programs like Jamaica. So they use role modeling, coaching, discussion, encouragement, and feedback, as well as some direct interaction with the PFL child. And all of the home visits are based around a curriculum of 210 tip sheets. So these tip sheets, here's an example. These tip sheets are really just kind of user-friendly, colorful sheets that provide kind of bite-sized information about how to promote your children's development. And they're all written to a reading level of about a 12-year-old. So for parents with literacy problems, they should be able to understand them. So how would...
I just jumped in. I remember you mentioned that one before, like in terms of the tip sheets, there's no, it's not like a China Rich or Jamaican Rich have curriculum. It's exactly like they design like for each weekly age and what kind of the task they provided. But here is just the general guidance, right, for the mentor, and they can have some freedom to choose what kind of like content to teach, right? Okay.
You're absolutely right. It's not like in week 1 they need to deliver tip sheet 1 to 2, in week 10 they need to deliver these. No, absolutely not. Obviously, the tip sheets are designed in periods. So there's the prenatal tip sheets, then there's tip sheets between 0 and 2, and tip sheets for between 2 and 4. And all parents must receive the tip sheets by the end of the program. But the mentors have absolute flexibility in terms of when they deliver each tip sheet. So the mentors have a lot of autonomy in deciding the timing of when to deliver tip sheets, how many tip sheets to deliver during each visit, and the emphasis also that they place on different tip sheets. So if they realize a family has absolutely no problem with nutrition and what they're feeding the child, they'll give them the tip sheets on nutrition, but they're not going to devote hours of the home visits to talking about nutrition if the family has already not got a problem with that. However, they will identify areas that the parents are having difficulties, and they will spend a longer time on the tip sheets, say, devoted to reading to your child, if that is an issue in the house. So the mentors have a lot more autonomy than they have in China Reach, in Jamaica.
Orla, do you have information on that? Like what tip sheets were given and which visits? And what
we do.
Have you explored that? Is there anything?
No. we have that data? Actually, I'm not even sure we have it. It's available because the mentors had to record at every visit what tip sheets were delivered. So the data is absolutely there. We've never analyzed it.
But I'd be interested to know how they're responding to the children's development, if there's any relationship to that. And just what does, if different home visitors do the process differently. I'm curious to know that.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not something we've explored yet, just because of the sheer number of tip sheets and visits that took place over a 6-year period. But yes, we have, I believe, we have the data. I have never actually looked at it though, but it is there.
But we're all, just to clarify what Victor's asking. So at a visit, which is like every 2 weeks, right? Fortnightly, is that correct?
Yes.
Roughly.
Roughly.
And at those visits, is there an assessment made of both the child and the parent? In other words, how is the next tip sheet chosen? Based on what information? Is it information on how the child is developed to that point? Or, so I'm just trying to get a sense of what the rule might be in giving tips.
So the tip sheets do have a chronological order, you know, roughly around the age of the child. So they do stick to obviously tip sheets that are relevant to the chronological age of the child. It's not like they're going to, yeah, so, you know, obviously they have to figure out, I'm not going, you know, they're not going to talk about tip sheets around breastfeeding, you know, when the child is 1, if the,
Sure.
you know, so it's logical, but it's based on, the idea is that the mentors build up a relationship with the parents starting during pregnancy that allows them to get an insight into what's happening in that family. And then the mentors, through building this relationship, will ask the parent at the start. So the mentors will go into the family home with an idea, okay, we're going to work on these tip sheets this week. And then the mentors will start with a review of what was, how the family got on during the week. So at each home visit, the mentors set some goals for the family and goals that the family need to achieve in the next 2 weeks based on the tip sheets that were delivered. So at the next visit, then they'll review those goals. Did the parents have any problems with it? You know, and review how they got on with the tip sheets. And if they found that, okay, they're fine, they can move on now to the next, let's say the tip sheets in the next order. But if they realize actually the parent is still struggling with the concepts in the tip sheets, they'll spend more time on them. So it's just based on the subjective, there's no rule. It's based on the subjective opinion of the mentor of what the family may need to focus on at that particular point in time. And they told us that at some visits, they didn't do any tip sheets because the family had other issues and they just didn't have an opportunity to deliver tip sheets. You know, you have to work with the family where they're at. And I think one of the strengths of PFL is that it's all about empowering parents and building on their strengths. So if a parent demonstrates strengths in a particular area, then the mentors aren't going to, they'll support the parent and say, you really are great at this, but you know, let's focus on something where we can help you. So there was no rule.
So that's kind of interesting, right? There's like personalized home visit. So I just wondering what kind of information you have that would be able to look at that in more detail.
Here it seems preparing for life, they need to have high requirement for the mentors, right? Because the mentor really need to provide the proper you know, trainings based on the children's development.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
they're not just following a set curriculum. You know what I mean? You can't just, here's a tip sheet, here's how to deliver them, go to it. It's way more than that. And what the mentors have done is that they have developed a criteria for your optimal mentor. So if you want to go and hire mentors, they have to have certain characteristics, and they're all around non-cognitive skills. They're all around socio-emotional skills.
Do you have some kind of guidance for the mentor provide the suggestions, at least in terms of when the supervisor give the training to the mentors? And we know in terms of the general progression, for the mentors will give the suggestion to the families.
No, we don't have access. We don't have that data. All we know is what tip sheets they worked on what in which sessions, unfortunately.
I see. Okay.
But is there any assessment of the mentors? In other words, can you say this is a good mentor, this is a bad? There must be some good matches and some bad ones. Is there any way to assess that?
No, we're not allowed to. So as part of one of our conditions of evaluating this trial was that we wouldn't evaluate mentor effects because there's only 5 mentors because it's such a small program, and they didn't want us analyzing treatment effects by mentors because they were, it was a small team of 5 people, and they don't want us highlighting this is a good mentor, that's a bad mentor. That was one of our conditions, that we aren't allowed to test for mentor effects. So we have to live with it. Okay, I'll move on. The second main treatment then.
Wait, John has a question.
Oh, sorry, John. Is it in the chat?
Not a question, just a comment. And it was just a callback to an earlier conversation. It's a longitudinal follow-up of Family Nurse Partnership. They just released some data this year at age 6, showing not a lot of outcomes, but possibly some school readiness or academic outcomes at age 6.
Oh, that's great. I haven't seen that. I only saw the one.
So I just put the link in there.
Thank you. Thanks, John. And John, it's great to see you again.
I know, it's great to see you too.
In a while. Okay, so thank you for that. So at age 6, okay, I must check that out. I mean, they found very little effects at age 2, so it'll be interesting to see at age 5, at age 6. Okay. So baby massage is the second main treatment offered to parents in their first year. There was 5 baby massage classes of 2 hours each that took place in the group-based setting, and the aim of this component of the treatment was to try to emphasize the importance of early communication between parents and infants and to encourage greater parental stimulation, with the added benefit of just providing an incentive for parents to join the program, because everyone likes baby massage, apparently. So it was kind of seen as an easy win to get people into the program. And again, just to note that all of the treatments were provided by the same mentors. So the same mentors delivered the baby massage classes. Then the final treatment is the Triple P positive parenting program that I'm sure many of you know. It's operating in multiple countries around the world, including the US. Here, the parents were offered group Triple P that included 5 2-hour group discussion sessions with some follow-up phone calls. And these took place between the ages of 2 and 3. And again, the aim of Triple P is to promote healthy parenting behavior and positive parent-child attachment. And if the parents did not want to participate in the group sessions, then the mentors would deliver the Triple P content in the home visits instead. So parents, if you like, they had a choice there. Okay, so in terms of the design of the trial, eligibility criteria was, as I always say, was simple.
Did the Triple P, just to clarify, do the Triple P visits then focus on how you might treat this particular child? In other words, respond. How general are the lessons of the Triple P, and how tailored to the child are they? You know,
less so than the home visits, because the Triple P is a set curriculum. It's a standardized program, and it's supposed to be delivered in a group-based setting, so that it's not about tailored to each individual child. It's more general about it's mainly focused on kind of addressing child behavioral issues. So focus is definitely more on behavior of the child than on, say, cognitive development, but it's much more standardized and there's much less flexibility to focus on the individual child, whereas the home visits are tailored more
so just to clarify, so there is like a checklist. When you're in Triple P, you go through a checklist. You have a curriculum, if you will, or at least a schedule. Yeah. Is that correct?
That they have a curriculum. Yeah, I don't know if there's a check, but they have it's a set curriculum because it's only X number. It's 5 sessions, and then for each of those 5 sessions has a theme, has set exercises. There's role-playing exercises. They're given homework to do between each session. Yeah, so it's more of a standardized parenting program.
So, but it's only in a limited, like a 2-year window, right?
Oh, 1 year. So all the parents had to do it when their children were between 2 and 3. That 12-month period.
Yeah, you said that. Right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the eligibility criteria. We recruited the sample at the local maternity hospital and also within the local community. And the parents on average were about 20 weeks pregnant when they joined the program, with some variability, of course. We just randomized the sample using simple randomization with no strategy.
So just to follow up, sorry, I want to clarify.
No, it's fine.
So this program starting between 2, is there any adaptation of the age at which you start the program? In other words, if the child's exhibiting some kind of behavioral problem, you might want to start it early or maybe start it later. I'm not sure. Is there any flexibility there or not?
In Triple P more generally, there is. So group Triple P can be delivered to any child, the parent of any child over the age of 2. Right up to 10, or I'm not actually sure how far it goes up, but it's not specifically for children of parents of 2-year-olds. But in Preparing for Life, it was between the ages of 2 and 3. So, but the parents could choose, because they had multiple sessions over that period. The parents could choose to do it when the child was 2, 2.5, 3. So there was flexibility there, but really it was up to the parents to decide in consultation with the mentors. So the mentors would say, okay, look, you're eligible for this part of the program, do you want to take part? So the mentors could encourage the parents to do it, and the mentors did encourage all the parents to do it. But really it was only within that 1-year period that they encouraged parents.
No, I'm just curious. I see a lot of this, and John could probably answer this too. There seems to be a lot of this kind of age-generated, age-targeted treatment or some kind of program. Whereas I can imagine that the developmental profiles must be very, very different from child to child. And you'd want to adapt to where the child's at and, literally either accelerate or decelerate the kind of profile of intervention you're giving the child. I don't know if there's much.
That's exactly what would have happened in the home visits, which were specifically tailored to the developmental needs of each individual child.
So do the home visits change in that year in which they're going to this other program, Triple P? Do you see any change in the nature of the home visits in response to what's going on in the other program? Are they coordinated in any way or not?
Are coordinated. So it's only 5 weeks. So the Triple P program is only for 5 weeks, and you don't have any home visits during that 5-week period.
I see. Okay. So it's a substitute during that period. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we allocated 115 to the high treatment group and 118 to the low treatment group, and then we test for baseline equivalence across both groups, and we found that there was no significant differences on 107 of 117 baseline measures we assessed, or 92%. So we were confident that our randomization procedure was effective. Throughout then during the trial, we collected 10 rounds of quantitative data, as well as lots of qualitative data as well. We conducted interviews with parents, interviews with children. We accessed their medical records at birth and later as well. And we did then some direct assessments of the children. And all this data that we have is publicly available. Anyone can access it. It's available on the ISDA.ie website if anyone is interested. It's all publicly available data. Just to kind of summarize what we found at the end of the trials, this is at age 5, we found that the program had a large and substantive impact on children's skills at age 4 or 5. So it raised overall cognitive skills by 0.77 of a standard deviation. We found similar effects in terms of children's spatial, verbal, and pictorial reasoning ability. We found that the entire distribution of children's skills was shifted. So the program had an impact on children both at the upper and the lower end skills distribution. We also found some effects on children's internalizing and externalizing problems. And in particular, the program reduced the proportion of children scoring within the clinical range on the CBCL, externalizing and internalizing domains. However, I would say that the effects we find for children's cognitive development were always much stronger. The effect sizes were much larger than those effects we observed for children's socio-emotional skills. So then, something that I'm always
but you had a very different, but in terms of the profile, you had a series of studies in that period, 0 to 5. And yes, they were not, these end of trial results are different from what you would have had at age 2, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so have you studied that as to why that occurs? Is it because you use different measurements? Or is it because I don't know how comparable the measurements were at 2 and 5, or some other factor about maturation? I don't know how do you resolve the fact that early measures that you report are very, very weak, and then later measures very strong?
So we find, you're right, we didn't find any evidence of treatment effects before the age of 2, but then after the age of 2, we consistently found treatment effects in terms of children's cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills as well, but not before the age of 2. This could, we don't know why, though, as in it could be a measure because we're using, well, we didn't actually, we do have the same measures. We do have some of the same measures over that time period. And we start to see an emergence of treatment effects on some of those measures at certain time periods that we didn't observe before. So we have certain measures in common across the entire duration of the trial, but only we started to see treatment effects from 24 months onwards. However, we also have some different measures, and the strongest effects that we observed are the ones I'm reporting here for the children's cognitive skills were collected using the British Ability Scales, and we only collected those at age 4. So I don't have the British Ability Scales at previous time points. So that is also a contributing factor. It could be that because the measures that we collected at age 4 were based on direct assessment where we measured the children's skills ourselves. whereas on previous assessments, it was mainly based on parent report. So I can't unfortunately say, is it because we used some different measures, or is it because it just took a while for treatment effects to emerge? When we look at the measures that we do have in common over time, we find though that there was no treatment effects for a number of assessment points, and then we consistently start to see treatment effects, which would suggest to me that actually it just took a period of time for the cumulative effect of the treatment to actually to emerge.
Well, but some of the measures themselves may have been age inappropriate.
All of the measures, I would say all of the measures we used were appropriate for use of the age range that we were working with. We would never use a measure that wasn't appropriate and that wasn't validated for the age range we were working with. Okay. Because it was all psychologists on my team, who were advising on what measures to use. And so all of the measures were specifically chosen because you could use them at that age. So I don't think that was it. I think it was, obviously we do find stronger effects when we use our measures of direct assessment. And if I was to go back and do this trial again, I would absolutely suggest doing more direct assessments at earlier age points, which we didn't do in this trial, unfortunately. So take note for future trials. I would use direct assessment earlier on, so we can try to address some of these issues, because we can't, unfortunately, say if it's due to a change in measurement or because it took time for treatment effects to emerge.
It's just, do you have any hint at why they emerge? Some change in parenting behavior. Did they emerge more quickly for some of the parents who seem to be more interactive with their children, or colder style? I'm just curious if there's any hint about the rate at which these factors, these treatment effects emerged.
No, we didn't find differences according to, let's say, we did some analysis where we compared treatment effects, like differential effects by gender and first-time parent status, and whether it was a kind of high-quality family or not. And we find no evidence that during the trial that that's called the higher ability parents were reacted more to the intervention than the lower ability parents. So we don't find any evidence of that. What I believe from working on this trial for so long, I might be wrong, but I know it quite well. And I think it takes time. It takes time for mentors, particularly in these families that are face a lot of issues, and they're quite initially not very open to having visitors, or having home visitors, or people kind of intervening in their lives. It took a very long time for the mentors to build relationships of trust with these parents. But 2 years into it, they realized these mentors were not going away, and that they could trust these mentors, that they could form relationships with them. And I just think over time, they became more responsive to the material that the mentors were disseminating to them. And that could be why we started to see these results. I actually think it's more about the relationship between the mentors and the parents rather than measurement issues. That's why we're seeing treatment effects when
right, but you have an indirect measure of that, right? In terms of parenting, whether or not, I'm just curious, that's why I'm surprised there isn't a relationship. Yes, and the parenting improves, but maybe, well, you're going to tell us that, I guess, later. Show us how.
I am going to tell you this, but not by time points, so that's something I can do.
Yeah, okay, no, that would be very fascinating. Because you're describing a break-in effect, which is human, right? People, you have no trust in somebody who walks in the door. 2 years later, you do.
Yeah.
Or you may hate the person, but at least you know them, right?
At least you know them. Yeah, exactly. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's something we can look at that we haven't.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I would find it fascinating.
Yeah, we can look. Okay. So
and just a related question, like you're looking at child outcomes. I think that's really the question, Professor Heckman. Is like, have you looked at parental outcomes, like mental health of the parent, and whether that starts early or later? Or anything?
Yeah, I'm not going to report parental outcomes, parental treatment effects today. We find effects on parenting, but not parental mental health or parental well-being. So we find no evidence of treatment effects on parent mental health or parental self-esteem, parenting self-esteem or self-efficacy, or anything to do with the parents themselves. what we find treatment effects on in terms of parenting is physical, real things that parents can do to their child or with their child. Like they're feeding them better food, they're reading to them more frequently, they're exposing them to a better quality home learning environment. So that's where we see treatment effects for parents.
I see. Thanks.
Okay, I'm just concerned of time, so I might skip over some of this. This is contamination. It's not essential. Basically, we test for contamination because obviously we are operating in a very small community of 1.1 square miles. And members of the same family, or sorry, members of the high and low treatment group can be friends or neighbors. So we kind of look at contamination using these blue dye questions just to see if the parents in the high treatment group are kind of sharing the materials they get with the mentors with the low treatment group. And we include these blue dye questions where we ask with the high and low treatment group questions about their knowledge of child development or parenting that were specifically in the tip sheets. And then the mentors spend lots of time talking to the parents about these things. And that kind of expectation is that if the high treatment group report high levels of knowledge of these terms and also how to do these, engage in these behaviors, it may provide some evidence that they were contaminated. But as you can see here, we ask various things like, have you heard of mutual gaze? Do you know what mutual gaze is? Circle of security, triple P, descriptive praise, emotional literacy, the feeling wheel. And we find out apart from emotional literacy, where no one really knows what it is, the high treatment group consistently report higher knowledge of these terms than the low treatment group. It's not perfect. I'm not saying this is a pure measure of contamination, but it is providing some suggestive evidence that contamination may not be a massive issue.
Okay, would you have a measure of adjacency? In other words, children playing with each other. The lesson could carry over to the child. It doesn't have to be to the parent.
Yeah, we don't know who the children. We don't know who the children.
But you have the address, right?
Oh yeah, we have the addresses. Yeah.
So you could look at adjacent pairs or adjacent children, I guess, right?
Yeah, we could. But because it's such a small community, they really all. Oh, so we could look at like next door neighbors or people who live on the same street.
Right. I'm just curious if there is kind of a spatial leakage effect. There's a lot of work on spillovers that suggests there might be such things. So
yeah.
Anyway, I don't know what form it would take, but if the child is developing in a certain way and acts in a certain way through imitation, the child would, do what his peer is doing. Even the peer the peer is treated, but the child isn't, and nonetheless imitates kind of behavioral patterns. I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems like a possibility.
That absolutely. Yeah, no, we do have their addresses. We just haven't done it because, well, I need someone to help with, or not to help. I don't have a team anymore. It was great when I had actually research assistants and postdocs, but I don't. But yes, we do have the addresses. It will be a matter of just defining closeness, like what you take into account as being a peer. Is it people who live next door, people who live in the community is very difficult to get around. It's a very complicated community in terms of street. You can't use street addresses because they turned the houses all inside out in the 1980s. I won't go into it, but they basically messed up all the street names in the 1980s where they turned the houses back to front. So anyway, sorry. It's just very complicated, but it is probably possible to do. I'm going to talk about the. Yes, sorry.
There's 2 questions on chat. Maybe.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, I'll have a look. What are they? Oh, Becky's okay. Yes, I don't. John, but you did not have too many people drop out of the intervention, right? Well, I'm going to present the attrition results or the level of attrition on my next slide. So I'm actually on this slide, I'm showing attrition. So I'll show you. We actually do observe during the trial attrition wasn't that high, but the age 9 follow-up attrition is an issue. So I'm going to talk about that now.
But I meant the attrition in the program, like the intervention, you didn't have a lot of families who just at some point refused to see their home visitor and said, I'm done with this, right?
We had some families for sure who didn't, but we have a lot of variability. So on average, the families received 50 home visits over the course of the trial on average. But we did have actually some families, 15% of the families who never received any home visits. And then we have, I think, another 15% of the sample who received more than 120 home visits. So there was quite a high level of variability in how much treatment the family actually received. So we do have variability there, but on average, it was one visit every month.
And initial take-up rates at the start, was it generally popular in the community?
It was 52%. The take-up rate was 52%. So 52% of all pregnant women in the community joined the program. Now, some of them, it wasn't that the other 48% actively refused to join. It's just that we never saw them. We never met with them. They didn't present in the hospital, or they didn't, we just never had an opportunity to tell them about the program. And they may have heard it from informal links, but we had very few what I would call active refusals. So we had very few people say, I don't want to join. Anyone who we actually ended up meeting and going through the recruitment interview, I think maybe one or two people ever said no. Everyone joined. But again, some people in the community didn't join because we didn't have a chance to have that one-on-one meeting with them. But 52% is the rate, or what we consider our participation rate. And then Ariel's asking, any thoughts on why knowledge declines over time? Yes, in the contamination, that's a very good point. That's something we do talk about. I don't know. I just wonder, is this too much knowledge? So early on, you have less tip sheets, you have less knowledge to retain. By 5 years later, you're 210 tip sheets in, and it just could be an overload of information, and actually their capacity to retain information could be lower. I mean, I'm only hypothesizing, I don't know. I would say that the IQ of the parents is quite low. It's 81 on average. So these are quite low IQ parents. So it could just be an overload of information, perhaps.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Okay, I'm conscious of time always. So age 9 follow-up, we got funding 3 years ago to go back and recruit the sample again, or sorry, to do a follow-up now that children were age 9. So our biggest struggle was trying to find these families, because when we went into the field, it was at the same time that the EU legislation around GDPR came in, which really restricted us in what we were allowed to do to find the families. So that kind of accounts for some of our attrition rate. So just to say that at the end of the trial, when the children were 5 years old, we had retained 65% of the high treatment group and 63% of the low treatment group. So at least our level of attrition across both groups was relatively equal. But as you can see here, by the time we got to the age 9 follow-up, again, depending on the assessment, we retained about 60% of the high treatment group, which was similar to the end of the trial, but only 40% of the low treatment group. So this is the first time we really are seeing this differential attrition rates across the two groups. The reason for this was because we very much had to rely on the mentors to try to find the parents to do the follow-up study. And of course, the mentors just have more contact with those in the high treatment group. So it was really our recruitment strategy that led to this differential effect. So this is something obviously now we need to be very concerned about. So the first thing we did was we wanted to test of whether or not our samples were still balanced in terms of baseline characteristics. So we compared the baseline characteristics of the high and low treatment group for our 3 age 9 estimation samples. And we found that the two groups didn't differ on 93% of the baseline measures for a child sample, 90% for school sample, and 87% for the parent sample. And our initial baseline equivalence at randomization was 92%. So very similar, at least for the child and school samples. So our samples, despite this attrition, are still balanced in terms of baseline characteristics. This is just a flavor of what the baseline characteristics of the sample of the age 9 estimation sample looks like. So I won't go through this in detail, but on average, the parents were at 25 years old. Half of them were first-time parents. About a third of them were previously diagnosed with a mental health condition. And as I said, average IQ in the sample was relatively low at 84 in the high treatment and 82 in the low treatment group. So again, it's kind of a very disadvantaged, for Ireland, this would be considered a very disadvantaged sample. So while we do have baseline equivalence across baseline variables, we still need to test for differential attrition processes in the treatment group, in the high and low treatment group, given these differential rates. So we looked at how many of our baseline factors predict attrition in the high and low treatment groups separately. And we found that 32% of our baseline measures predict attrition from the high treatment group and 11% from the low treatment group. So there is some evidence of systematic, or if you like, differential attrition within the high treatment group. And I'm obviously not going to show you all the results, but here we're just running regressions where the dependent variable is participation in the age 9 assessment. We include treatment dummy, the baseline measure, and then an interaction between treatment and our baseline measure. And you can see across many of these socio-demographics, we're not seeing any evidence of differential attrition, but we are finding some evidence in that the parents of children in the who participated in the high treatment group in the assessment at age 9, they're older, they have higher IQ, and their mothers are more likely to be employed during pregnancy. So again, we are seeing some evidence that it was the, if you like, the better parents that did participate in the age 9 assessment. So obviously we want to address this, and we address it using inverse probability weighting, using these baseline characteristics where we adjust all our estimates for IPW to try to address this issue of differential attrition. We also have a small sample size, so we use permutation testing. We have multiple outcomes, so we use the Romano and Wolf step-down procedure. So just moving on to the results. Again, the results I'm reporting are intention to treat estimates using IPW adjusted permutation tests controlling for gender, but we've obviously tested the robustness of the results using other methods for dealing with attrition like Lee bands. We also estimate conditional results where we control for baseline differences, and we use standard tests and not implying IPW and so on. The results seem pretty robust to this. I'll skip this just so I can get on to the results. So we assess children's cognitive skills using the same measures that we use at age 5, that's the British Ability Skills, and we're seeing evidence of significant treatment effects on BAS scores. So the high treatment group have higher scores than the low treatment group. These results are statistically significant and also clinically significant with large effect sizes. So the effect size on overall general ability is 0.67 of standard deviation. The largest effect we're finding is in terms of children's nonverbal ability. So that's assessing their inductive reasoning skills. So we are seeing we're seeing a slightly lower effects than we found at age 5. At age 5, the mean difference in IQ scores was 10 points, and now it's closer to 8 points. So it's still quite large, but slightly reduced, which you probably would expect. We also use the BAS scores then to look at the proportion of children scoring above and below the average or the norm. We are not finding that the program had any impact on the proportion of children scoring above the norm. If you look at the IPW, these are the step down p-values, so the more conservative p-values. However, we are finding significant treatment effects in terms of the proportion of children scoring below the norm. So the high treatment group are consistently less likely to score below the norm compared to the high treatment group. And if you just look at one of the results like verbal ability, 33% of the children in the high treatment group score below the norm, which is still pretty bad, but compared to 60% in the low treatment group. We next look at executive functioning using the NIH Toolkit, where we assess inhibitory control, attention flexibility, and working memory. And consistent with the cognitive results, we're also finding evidence of significant treatment effects. High treatment group have better executive functioning skills than the low treatment group. And again, the effect sizes range from about 0.5 to 0.6 of a standard deviation. So again, these results are consistent with the cognitive results, but looking at a variety of different types of executive functioning skills. Next, we were able to access data on the children's maths and reading scores that they do in primary school. So all primary school children have to do these tests when they're in school. And we were able to access those tests when they were in 2nd class and when they were in 3rd class. Note the sample size for the 3rd class is lower because not all children were in 3rd class yet when we assessed their skills. And again, consistent with the cognitive results, we're finding that the high treatment group have higher scores than the low treatment group. Here, the effect sizes vary depending on the time point and the type of skill we're looking at. But again, we're looking at effect sizes from 0.3 of a standard deviation to 0.7 of a standard deviation. One of the advantages of these school assessments is that they're normed based on an Irish sample, unlike the BAS results that are based on the British sample. So this kind of allows us to compare the Preparing for Life child to the average Irish child. And we're finding that the program did have some effects on improving the proportion of the high treatment group scoring above the norm in terms of their 2nd class math scores and 3rd class reading scores. And again, we're finding these consistent results for those scoring below the norm, that the children are less likely to score below the norm in the high treatment group. And we know that in Ireland, about 1/3 of children score below the norm. And you can see in the PFL sample, the high treatment group, 1/3 of them are scoring below the norm. While in the low treatment group, you can see it's much higher. It's about 60 to 50% of them are scoring below the norm. So I think this is my favorite result. I have to pick a result from the age 9 follow-up, because it shows that the program really has brought these very disadvantaged children to the Irish norm, like the average Irish child. And that's where the treatment effects end. We also go on to look at effects on children's absenteeism rates and their use of school resources, and we don't find any evidence of treatment effects, mainly because very few of these kids ever miss school anyway. So 94% of children, the high and low treatment group, are attending school or don't miss any school days. Obviously, the last year it would have been different, but this year, back when we did it, that's what we found. We're also finding that there's no evidence of treatment effects in terms of if they're receiving additional supports within school, in terms of in-class or out-of-class supports, the use of special needs assistance and so on. But we find that the low treatment group are more likely to avail of these supports than the low treatment group. But again, we're not finding statistically significant results, and the effect sizes are quite low as well. Next, we go on to look at children's socio-emotional skills. And we have data here on both parent report and both child report of socio-emotional skills. So we have 2 different raters, which is an advantage. We use the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. We use the brief problems monitor, which is basically a short version of the CBCL that we use at age 5. And we use the social skills scale as well for the child report. And you can see that across none of the measures, essentially, we're not finding any evidence of treatment effects on children's socio-emotional skills at age 9. And here I'm just reporting the continuous scores. We've also looked at the cutoff scores, looking at the proportion of children who score within the clinical range. And again, we're not finding any evidence of treatment effects once we look at those children scoring within the clinical range as well.
Do you compare those measures with age 5? Because I think like you do the similar measures at age 9 and age 5 for the social emotional skills, right?
Yeah, you're right. We have the strengths and difficulties questionnaire at age 5, but we don't have the others. We don't actually, the only measure we have in common is the STQ. Mm-hmm. Now for the BPM though, it's very similar to CBCL. It's developed by the same people, and it's believed to be just a shorter version. So you can do a direct comparison between CBCL and the
but at least you can find the common items, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see, because you get some effect at age 5, right? But now like come to the age 9, and at least you can get which directions, like maybe the children improved or like not improved, and probably can get more information on social emotional skill.
Yeah, I haven't done an item by item comparison, but that's a good idea. I can do it because, as I said, a lot of these measures at the individual item, we have some of them at age 9 as at age 5, because we have them all at age 5. So I can do that. I have looked at the correlation between the age 5 and the age 9 scores for the common measures. I have to look at the paper. I can't remember what the correlation was. Positive for sure, but it wasn't particularly high. So that's something I can go back and look at, Jin. That's a good idea.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. So one issue is that perhaps these effects that we're seeing on children's test scores and cognitive ability and achievement tests are driven by differences in the type or quality of primary schools chosen by the parent, if the program changed parental preferences regarding school choice. So we know that the Preparing for Life children attended, there's only 120 of them, but they went to 36 different primary schools, which is quite a lot of schools in a very small area. And we found that 14 of them, for 14 schools, we have both high and low treatment children attending the same schools. And then for the remaining schools, we have one child in one school, one treatment child in one school, one control child in another school. So what we have done is here, we've just compared the school characteristics of the children attending the schools attended by the high treatment children and the low treatment children, just to see if there's differences. And we're not finding any evidence, at least on these measures. So There's no differences regarding whether they're attending what we call a disadvantaged school in Ireland, the gender of the school, or whether or not the school is within the catchment area or not, and the distance from the catchment area. Now, so we're not finding any differences here, but obviously what we would like is to have a measure of test scores of the measure of test of ability, I guess, within the high and low treatment schools. But unfortunately, we don't have that data. The best we were able to do, and I think this was based on a suggestion I got at a previous presentation, is I was able to access the small area population statistics from the census and match it to the school addresses. So this provides very low level disaggregated data. The small area population statistics, they includes about 90 residential households. So you can really drill down to the areas directly surrounding the school. And here I'm just comparing the characteristics of the communities in which the schools are based, attended by the children, the high and low treatment group, just to see again, is there any evidence that the parents are choosing to send their children to different types of schools, or at least to schools in different types of communities, like better communities. And as you can see from the p-values here, there's no differences across in the types of communities that they're sending their children in terms of demographics, in terms of employment, employment status, in terms of education, and in terms of health. So we're not, basically, there doesn't seem to be much differences between the communities in which they're attending. So this would suggest that, again, it provides some evidence that perhaps the treatment effects that we are observing are due to the program itself, and not any kind of additional differences in the characteristics of the schools that the children are attending. So it's just a little bit more evidence to perhaps that these treatment effects are being generated by the program. And just in the last 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I'll talk about the mediation analysis, which
you have until 1:50, so it's 11 minutes.
Oh, even better. Excellent. Okay, that should be okay. But again, I'll show you what I've done for this mediation analysis. It is different than the mediation analysis I presented before. But I kind of suspect I'm not looking at them by time points. So, but anyway, that's something I can do. So we wanted to try to explore like where are these treatment effects coming from. So during the life of the trial, as I said, we collected a variety of different measures measuring parenting and the quality of the home environment. So we have 190 different potential mediators. Again, we have 120 people in the trial at this point. So we have more mediators than participants. So I needed some way to kind of reduce down the data. So I used confirmatory factor analysis, VSM, to extract 5 latent factor scores that were capturing the main dimensions of parental inputs. But even then, it was not possible to estimate a model with including all 190 potential mediators, given the very small sample size that I have. So I had to restrict the analysis in some way, or I had to reduce down the number of variables I include in some way. So here now I'm only looking at variables that actually predict the outcome, that are associated with children's test scores. So that gives me about 21 different measures of parenting that actually predict or associated with children's test scores. And then among those 21 measures, I classified them according to the types of parenting that they were tapping into. And it results, so I have these 5 different latent factors, including parenting style, that's picking up measures of permissive parenting, again, at 36 months and 48 months. And it also includes a measure of dysfunctional interactions at 48 months. The parenting beliefs then includes the parents' belief in faith. So basically how much they think parenting is random or not. And perceived parental impact. So that's a measure of how much impact the parent thinks that they have on their child's life. And these are based on subdomains. So I'm not using individual items. If I use individual items, I would have thousands of items go into these scales. So here I'm using subdomain levels. So this can include like 6 or 7 different items, I suppose. Next, we're looking at the parent-child relationship, and it includes measures of maternal separation anxiety at 18 months. This measure, it's pleasure in interaction. It's how much pleasure the mother gets from interacting with her child at 24 months. And then we have a measure of whether or not the parent is overprotective at 24 months. In terms of parental stimulation, it's mainly then coming from the home scores in terms of reading to the child, how responsive the parent is to the child's behavior, and how involved the parent is in the child's learning. And then the parental health investment measures are very much around nutrition and whether or not the child is meeting their daily recommended allowance of different food groups like protein, fruit, vegetables, and dairy. So the CFA, the confirmatory factor analysis, you can see from the fit indices at the bottom, are all supportive of this 5-factor model. So that's the one that we went with after trying multiple models. So then we took these 5 latent factors and we're still using the MAL method, mediation method, to look at, again, how much of the treatment effects can be explained by these latent factors. So I'm going to present them separately for each of the factors. First, I'm presenting the results looking at the health inputs, and we see evidence of significant mediation based on the average causal mediated effect. There we find evidence of significant mediation for the GCA scores and for the MAT scores. So I'm only looking at these 3 outcomes. So we find that the GCA scores, about 45% of the effects for GCA scores is explained or can be explained by this health inputs. And 38% of the MAT scores can be explained by these health inputs. And this, as I said, is mainly around child nutrition. And there is evidence, at least there's associational evidence showing that children who have better improved nutrition, that can have an impact on brain functioning, which may explain the effects that we're getting there in terms of children's cognitive skills. Next, we're looking at the impact of parenting style. And again, this was measures of whether or not the parent is a permissive parent or not. And we're not finding any evidence of significant mediation. And again, if you look at the proportion mediated, it's really small, so nothing there. For parental beliefs, and again, parental beliefs are really tapping into whether or not the parent believes that they can impact their child and have an impact on their child's development. And here we're finding evidence of significant mediation for the reading scores and math scores, and they're explaining between 20 and 30% of the treatment effects on those outcomes. Next, we're looking at the parent-child relationship. And again, this is very much around parental attachment. And we're, again, not finding any evidence of mediation around parental attachment for any of the measures, but we are finding evidence for parental stimulation. So this is very much the home environments, using the home scores and how frequently they read to the child and so on. And we're finding evidence of significant mediation for both the GCA score and the MAT score, and it's explaining about 20 to 25% of the treatment effects. So this is the mediation analysis that the most recent one that we have done, or I have done. So again, it's just one form. I think there's lots of different ways to do this. So I'm interested in hearing more about that if we have time, about what we can do. But I will just, in the last few minutes, just conclude, and then we can have a chat.
Can I just ask a question about this table?
Yeah. Oh, I'll go
above. Just go back. Yeah. So for example, this relationship, I'm not sure how these are coded, for example, but you're saying the parent-child relationship is seemingly having a strong and negative effect on these scores. I'm not sure what that measure is.
Oh, sorry. I should have explained it. So for the
sounds counterintuitive, actually, but again,
yeah,
it depends on how you measure it.
I should have. Yeah, you're right. They're all coded. I should have said they're all. Well, this is coded so that it's basically worse. Higher scores are more negative investment.
Higher scores are more negative. I see. More negative.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So I mean, it's yeah. Well, no, for the parent-child relationship, it's negative. Actually, I should code them in all the same direction. It's a good point. But for
that's okay. But I mean, but I thought before you were saying that things like what I would have called attachment and various forms of relationship weren't very strong. These look very strong, right?
So, well, some of these. So, if you look at the parenting style, we can
what
see
is
there's
that
no. Parenting style in this, so we're looking at this table here. Parenting style is a measure of permissive parenting, whether they engage in permissive parenting or they have a permissive parenting style or not. Okay. So that's what that one is tapping into. It's whether you're an authoritarian parenting, an authoritative parent, or a permissive, we call it permissive parenting. So the standardized 3-dimensional parenting styles. That's what that's picking up. And we're not finding that it predicts child's outcomes once you control for treatment. So if you don't control for treatment, we see an association, but once you control for treatment, we're not finding any evidence of significant mediation.
But across a lot of the other elements in this table. Looks like there's strong parental effects, right?
Oh yeah. So for example, like parental beliefs. And again, these are coded so that higher scores mean worse beliefs. I should have made that clear, actually. Sorry.
Okay, fine.
But here you can see that, so parents who believe that they have less, basically they don't have any impact on their child. So there's no point in investing in their child. So parents who have these types of beliefs, you can see that their children have lower test scores consistently.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a comparable measure for the child? Whether or not the child thinks it can learn or change?
I don't have a measure of that, unfortunately. No.
Okay, no, this is interesting. This is kind of like, the counterpart in educational psychology, Dweck, but that's more the child rather than the parent.
No, we only have it for the parents.
It's a counterpart to it. It's interesting to put them both, to see it this way, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose we collected these measures obviously at 24 months, 36 months, 48 months. So the children were a little bit too young to ask them for what they thought about their parents. But it's interesting for the health inputs. We are finding very strong treatment effects. Not treatment effects, we're finding that health inputs and parental health investments have a big impact on children's skills.
Isn't that surprising though? You mentioned at the beginning that, this is a welfare state. There are plenty of nutrition programs. None of these people are starving.
No.
It's not like they've been deprived of vitamins or nutrition. So it's a little odd, isn't it?
Not for me. When you look at the diets of these families, this community, yes, food is not a problem. The availability of food is not a problem. The type of food that they eat is a problem.
So these are potato chips versus.
These are McDonald's. These are McDonald's versus having a home cooked meal, basically.
I see.
And there's so many tip sheets. So there's so many tip sheets that are actually emphasizing food and nutrition. And the tip sheets even include recipes for the parents to cook to their child. There's a very big emphasis on improving the child's nutrition. So I'm not surprised by these treatment effects. Or not treatment effects. I'm not surprised by these models. Okay, so
just to, this could be just like a measure of the parent following the tip sheet, right?
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah. But then it could be
as opposed to nutrition. I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean just self-reported? Yes, this is what they eat.
No, I'm saying that.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying that it's a good measure of what the parent is following the tip sheet and the instructions from the home visitor, which could carry over to non-nutritional interactions.
Yeah, because we actually went through and counted how many tip sheets that were on nutrition, and it's something like, I think it's like 49 of the tip sheets are just about food out of the 200. There's a lot of tip sheets on food. And actually in another paper that I have, one of my PhD students, she goes into like a deep dive on the content of the tip sheets and directly linking it to health outcomes. But that's a paper she has, so it's a separate paper.
What is the dropout rate of people who have a high level of health inputs? I'm curious. I mean, taking Victor's point, you think these are the people who are more, devoted or more committed to the program and therefore would be less likely to drop out.
Well, did I look at that? I don't think I have tested that, but I can do. So I have these measures of nutrition from 6 months onwards.
Yeah.
So I have measures, so actually I can see.
No, it's an interesting measure that he's had here. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I can look at that.
Yeah.
So I know we've run out of time. So, this is just me summarizing the findings. We're basically, I won't reiterate, what we found, but I suppose I'll just do the last slide, which is about, why are we finding these treatment effects or these results, which some people could argue are different from some of the other studies in the field, like particularly if you compare it to ProKind that you saw last week. Just to say that, PFL starts during pregnancy, and it is longer in duration than most home visiting programs, including ProKind. And as I mentioned during the talk, it could be because this means that there was sufficient time for the mentors to develop relationships of trust with the parents, so they were more likely to take on board the information the mentors were giving them. But also it could be around not only that they had time to build up a relationship, but actually the intervention was intervening during the whole period of from pregnancy to age 5. which meant that the mentors, because they used this personalized approach, they could actually respond to the child's growing skill set. So while most interventions stop at age 2 and then sees what happens later, the mentors kept observing the child at age 2, 3, 4, 5, recognizing the children's skills and acknowledging the skills they had. They could build on those skills. So it was around kind of scaffolding on what the child, the skills the child had. So this may have helped kind of cement some of these treatment effects.
Did any mentors quit? Did you have like some turnover among mentors?
Yeah, very low.
So in terms of this notion of break-in, do you find that the mentors who consistently stayed on were the ones who, where the children were getting better? This is like the break-in hypothesis that's been, or learning by doing. So I'm curious, if they come in halfway through and they're really, is there any difference in terms of treatment effects?
We're not allowed to analyze that. We're not allowed to analyze treatment effects by mentors. So we can't, unfortunately, I can't tell you the answer to that formally.
Well, I mean, you're not judging the mentor, you're just judging exposure. I mean.
Yeah, we have looked at this, to be honest. And
Good.
We have, but we're not supposed to do it. We're not supposed to do it, but we have done it.
We're not going to turn you in. So what do you find?
This is being recorded.
We'll suppress it then.
Okay, cut off the last 5 minutes. So we actually, we do find, and in fairness, there wasn't much turnover in mentors, but we did have some new mentors joining and covering maternity leave. And we do see that the dropout rate increased when one mentor left and a new mentor joined. So we did see that actually getting a new mentor halfway through the program, some of the parents, that did cause a dropout. In terms,
child outcomes then?
In child outcomes, we didn't look at it in terms of child outcomes. We only looked at it in terms of dropout attrition rates.
Yeah, okay, but it'd be interesting to see how much of how much discontinuity would change the nature of the mentoring relationship.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I can look at that. So I'm going to finish there. If anyone has other questions, I'm happy to stay on, but I know some people may have class, teaching or other things to do. But just so you know, we are going back in 2 years' time. We have funding to go back when they're 13 years old, to follow them up to see what happens at age 13. And in Ireland, they start secondary school when they're 12 years old. So we'll now be observing them in what you guys would call high school. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I mean, it's great. I've had calls with Alison and Victor and Becky recently, so we are still very much in contact, and I hope to continue working with you guys over the next couple of years on preparing for life.
Yes, so do we. Very good. This is great to see you again.
You too.
So, all right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks.